Yes, the lady makes the point that there are a lot of Europeans in the construction industry that didn't have the right to vote. I can see this session is not going to be at all contentious. We've had 40 years in the EU completely entwined with building regulations, with standards being forced upwards and upwards, and of course with the labour market, as this lady just made clear. What on earth is going to happen when we pull ourselves away? We've just been discussing in the green room, the speaker's lounge, about what will happen with building standards. The government has said it will lift all environmental regulations from the EU and transpose them into UK law. Now, in fact, there's only about 70% that can be transposed. About 30% of the regulations can't be transposed and will need some other form of legal instrument. And green groups, for instance, and MPs too, are worried that the government might use this opportunity to use secondary legislation to start chipping away at those regulations. And what about building regulations? Do they get counted under green regulations, environmental regulations? The government conceivably could say, well, actually, that's not the environment, that's under a completely different department, that's about something else. So there is, I mean, obviously, and you all know this, you don't need me to tell you, there is massive, massive uncertainty about what is going to happen. Anyway, we have a panel this morning from very, very diverse sectors, or from the same sector, but from diverse interests and experience from that sector. First up is Diana Montgomery, Chief Executive of the Construction Products Association, who has a very impressive back CV and supply chain and skills. They're all going to talk to 3 to 5 minutes or so. I might chuck them a few questions. I like to involve the audience a lot, so be ready to put your hands up and shout at me like this lady did. Actually, madam, I offer you my congratulations. In my entire 25 years of chairing conferences like this, several a year, no one has ever interrupted my opening remarks before. So on the John Humphreys Radio 4 scale of interruptibility, that is really first class. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Roger. As Roger said, I run a trade association that represents all construction products. And I love speaking here because examples of them are literally all around you. Brexit for construction products, it's about uncertainty over the next few years. How do we retain investment? How do we continue to innovate when the future is looking more than uncertain? Regulations, as Roger said, in theory are coming over. We have building regulations that over the last 20 or 30 years have given us buildings that are safer, better quality, perform better and lower carbon. How do we keep that moving forward? And how do we make sure that if we bring everything over lock, stock and barrel, we don't end up with something set in stone, but actually continues to evolve to allow product manufacturers to innovate and allow buildings to be smarter, be more reflective of the way we want to live for the future. So I think there's some real challenges around regulation. We've got some real challenges, and you'll hear from Ant in a minute about standards. Standards in building products are absolutely critical. Every product you buy will have been tested by an independent body, be it BBA, BRE, or whoever, against standards. And that's why you know those products will do what they say they're going to do. Those standards need to remain. We need to remain globally competitive through ISO, and we need to work with CEN, the European Standards Agency, so we can export. Because at the moment, not many products are exported, but I have to say over the last few months with the euro to UK exchange rate, we're seeing a lot more companies suddenly realizing they can export to Europe, and there's a real opportunity there. So regulation, standards, skills, and as a lot of people are going to talk about skills, I'll merely observe we need a skills system that attracts people from all over Europe and the world to come and use their skills to help us create a world-class built environment. And we also, in the medium and long term, need to help people to acquire skills that are fit for the future. So they understand BIM, they can work in manufacturing sites that are fully digitized, they understand robotics, they understand smart technology. So there's some huge opportunities, and actually careers in construction are really, really quite exciting going forward. So how do we get young people as energized and enthused to come and work in construction as they might be to go and work in other forms of tech? And finally, I'd say there's an enormous opportunity for the UK in terms of attracting investment in manufacturing. Most manufacturing sites are in the Midlands, North East, North West, highly productive. We have a number of world-class plants that can basically beat anybody. How do we get more of that investment? And how do we make sure we are able to innovate, and then we get the supply chain to really use that innovation? Construction is so risk-averse that we're actually holding ourselves back from creating a built environment for the 21st century. So I guess that's my pitch, is the future is exciting, but it is what we choose to make of it. We're made up of businesses, and basically businessmen and women take a set of circumstances and get on with it. And I'd say the challenge to all of us now is to get on with it. We will have challenges. There will be things that are difficult, uncertainty, exchange rate, etc. But actually, what a golden opportunity we've got to really look at our opportunities and grab them and be entrepreneurial and take it forward. And Roger's standing up, so I will pass over.
No, you're staying there. You stay there. That's the perfect place for you.
That was 0 to 60.
No, I just wanted to ask you. I mean, that was quite an upbeat speech, quite bullish, positive. What grounds do you have to be positive? That's not a negative question. I mean, that's not a loaded question. It's an open question. What grounds are there to be positive?
Ultimately, we have to get on with it. And that's what businesses do best, is give us a set of difficult circumstances, and we will get on with it. You know, we basically have a construction market that's set to grow by 5.3 billion over the next 3 years. That's a massive market opportunity. So all the entrepreneurs in this room and this hall, that is a big market to go for. Why wouldn't you? So we can sit here and go, well, things are changing, but actually businesses are really good at change. That's what we thrive on. And I think the challenge for me is how we can make that change a really positive thing.
But how long before we can have a sufficient supply of skilled people that we can send Romanian builders back at the border?
Why do we want to send Romanian builders back?
Well, that's one possible outcome, isn't it?
You know, it is, and we need to get past that, because I think we need to attract skilled, talented people to work in our manufacturing sites, to work on our sites from all over the world, because that will give us a much richer outcome than just saying, well, we're going to do this. And also at the moment,
but that does sound like a Remain argument, and we did vote the other way.
I know we did, and we have to get on with it. But, you know, we are where we are. We have to grab the opportunities and get on with it.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure what your optimism is based on, but thank you for that. Thank you for that contribution. Anthony Bird, Head of Sector of Built Environment for the British Standards Institute, has been working inside government for many, many years on standards. Obviously, standards are a massive issue in terms of driving environmental issues in particular forward. That's been one of my interests, very, very rarely mentioned in the media, but standards across industries of all sorts have been one of the absolute surefire guarantees of getting improvements in carbon emissions, as well as in safety and all sorts of other things. Anne, please.
Thank you, Roger. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here today. As Roger said before, as way of background, for 17 years I was a civil servant, serving ministers of the Crown under national building regulations, and we were heavy users of standards. I now find myself at BSI, the UK's national standards body, your national standards body, heading up the built environment. From my perspective, in thinking about what we have before us today and my role at BSI, I find I travel all over the world, a bit too often as far as the family are concerned. And I see firsthand just how influential the UK truly is from a construction and a built environment perspective. So for me, going forward, post-Brexit, what is key is how the UK maintains this level of influence in terms of the innovative products and services we're able to offer both our national and our international marketplaces that we serve. Now, we're aware ministers are continuing to develop their negotiation strategy on Brexit. We have seen their white paper. But ultimately, they will need to decide on what should be done with those currently implemented European directives and regulations within the UK. And many of those actually relate to the built environment. So for me, the issue is twofold. Firstly, we need to implement what is right from a UK perspective as to the regulations surrounding how we design, build, and maintain our buildings, ensuring that we allow and facilitate innovation and the achievement of requisite performance in terms of energy performance, safety, accessibility, that is correct for the UK. all the while allowing approaches of design freedom and innovation of product selection to ensure that the industry is free from undue burdens of administration. So that was first. Secondly, we need to ensure we maintain the UK's role as an international player which supports a productive, open and competitive business environment. We heard only yesterday from our Chancellor in which he promised Britain would have a global future and to build an economy that works for everybody. One way of doing that is through maintaining the UK's role in the development of European standards. Quite simply, standards provide a common language for trade. They're developed by industry for industry. As good practice agreements, they enable interoperability, innovation, and supply chain confidence. They provide a means of legal compliance and reduce both production costs and international barriers to trade. You only have to look around us here today, ladies and gentlemen. The European standard system works because it is based on something called the single standards model. That is to say, when a European standard is developed, then all national standards bodies, including BSI, your UK national standards body, must adopt it as a new national standard and withdraw any existing conflicting national standards. This unique system results in a single standard for each aspect of a product or a service. And what it enables is reciprocal market access for all countries in the system. The introduction of this model has meant a huge reduction in the number of standards that businesses use for trade across borders, across Europe. It also means that industry no longer needs separate production lines for different countries. We do not want to go back to production lines for products for UK, Europe, and beyond. We've been there. It doesn't work. It's not fit for purpose. You won't be surprised to learn that the UK has significant influence in the development of European standards. UK business experts provide the leadership in over 500 standards developing committees and working groups, going from structural Eurocodes through to fire performance testing to the safety of cranes. We are world leading. So from our perspective, the UK is amongst the leading countries in the world in its near 100% use of international and European industry standards. So, our members and stakeholders tell us that maintaining full UK membership of the European standards bodies is critical to the success of UK business post-Brexit. It will provide a way for the UK to maintain its influence and its decision-making power inside or outside the regulations of the single market. It will keep Europe open for business on terms we will help to determine. By the same token, standards too provide a key element in new trade agreements. Through BSI experts, committee members, they too work on international standards. We can facilitate international trade through our continued full participation in European standardisation. We can influence the development of international standards in a way that simultaneously benefits UK business standards in Europe and internationally. The single standards model is an essential element for UK business and industry to realise new opportunities arising from Brexit in international and European trade and in terms of inward investment. So for us, it's business as usual. BSI's expectation is to remain a full member of CEN and CEN-elect, the European standards bodies, post-Brexit. Our membership is not contingent upon the UK staying in the European Union, and that's the most important point. Going forward, we anticipate government holding a regulatory approach that continues to support the single standard model. I think it's fair to say we all have views as to the outcome of that fateful day back in June last year, but we are where we are. Let's talk about it and agree how we can secure the best outcome for the UK. Let's assist our government too in their thinking around Brexit. They are listening, so let's make sure we are heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ant. That's an extremely positive vision. What can go wrong?
From our perspective, anything that could scupper the single standards model and how we as UK industry collectively come together and can influence understanding and development of European and international standards. As I said earlier, Roger, our membership of CEN, the European standards bodies, or one of them, the main one for us, is not contingent on us remaining in the EU. However, if government here were to ask for us to start reintroducing national standards that conflict with European standards, then our membership of SEN would become very difficult.
But let's just stick to the UK, for instance, construction within the UK. What if the government, what if, say, the EU decided to tighten standards on building regulations so all homes were 100% carbon-free, zero carbon homes? Would you have a fear that the UK wouldn't follow that, would pull us away from that?
We'd have to see what ministers had to say and where they wanted to go. I think we've had a very clear steer of government of the day as to where they wanted to go with zero carbon at this time. But I think we still need to be mindful that we can still operate very much in an international and European marketplace and still have subsidiarity of our own building regulations. I personally, because I was in charge of them for 7 years of my life, think we do have a very robust set of building regulations, including energy efficiency, but we could always do more.
And do you think we will do more, or how do you foresee things with Brexit?
I think when we see our commitments that still exist in terms of carbon reduction and similar, I think we will see a ramping up of energy efficiency. I have my own pet subject is that from a new build perspective, there's more we can do. However, for existing stock, I think there's an awful lot more we can do, and that's perhaps where I'd focus my time on this particular issue.
Right, I mean, we might see, just to fill people in, we might see something on that coming out in the next few weeks, the government's low carbon strategy, which they are rechristening their green growth strategy, I think will almost certainly include stuff on buildings. I don't know if you've heard about that or not.
No, I'll wait to see as well, Roger.
All right, okay, thanks very much, Anne.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we're going to hear from Oliver Campbell, who's from Link City, which is the old Bouygues, and he's an expert in the private rented sector.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for having me. Obviously, an enormous topic, so I'm going to concentrate just on two areas in terms of Brexit's impact on the construction industry. Just to let you know, Link City is the property development arm of Bouygues, which is Europe's second largest construction company. So the two big issues for us, I would say, in terms of Brexit are, number one, European labour, and secondly, sustainability. There's obviously a lot else to be said, but if I take those in turn, number one, European labour, let's just be clear. If we have a very hard exit, where we really do close the doors to access to European labour, we're going to have a problem for our construction industry. Just to give you some figures, I think officials say that 10% of our workforce in construction comes from migrant labour. And I thought, wow, that sounds a bit low, but I think when you start adding the other disciplines, architects, etc., it does start to go up. And in London, actually, on some sites, especially on the complicated projects, you are actually looking at figures of maybe up to 40% in terms of European or migrant labour. So essentially, it's a huge part of our workforce, both at the manual and the high skills end. So you've got that going on, and then at the same time, you have the government saying that they want to increase some very ambitious house building targets, whatever they are, 250,000 a year, and at the same time perhaps close the tap a little bit for our labour. It's just not going to happen. So we as an industry, the solution's pretty easy. We have to lobby together. We have to try and secure some kind of deal from the government where we still have access to European labour, granting them access into the UK to help us build the houses we all need, the infrastructure projects that we're all looking forward to, and making sure that everyone who comes here is treated equally, and they have their own benefits too. So that's a challenge for us. Now, what could go wrong? Let's say we do have a political will where we really do restrict access to European labour. Well, again, you're going to see pressure on wages go up. Yeah. And now the construction industry is just emerging from 2 years of pain, swallowing quite a lot of construction cost inflation. This time, I suspect it will definitely be passed on to end clients. Again, that will put pressure on viability of projects, and nobody wants to go there because that really does not fulfill the economic impact of house building and infrastructure projects. So that's why I tend to think I just cannot see the government going there. Now, is it all bad news? Well, I suspect, actually, maybe Brexit, in a funny kind of way, could give us a kick and be the thing that makes us modernise as an industry. If we are being asked to look at homegrown talent a little bit more, then we're going to have to start attracting people a lot more, yeah? So we're going to have to see how do we make the industry more attractive. I thought the government's announcement yesterday about the introduction of T-levels is actually moving in the right direction, where you're adding esteem to technical qualifications and maybe putting them at a par with, more academic A-levels. That's the start. £500 million probably isn't enough, but it's a start in the right direction. And if I can give you an example, in France, if you're a site manager or an engineer at a construction company, you're held with respect like a doctor or a lawyer or a professional is. I.e., you're technically minded, you're educated, and you have great responsibility. I just think that we've got to now start bringing that into our industry. And finally, in terms of the next generation down, you know that they're all infused by entrepreneurship. My goodness, there's so much to be done. When you see the way that we're moving towards modular construction or the way to improving the supply chain, you know, with the next generation, so much more technically minded and technologically enabled than older generations are. There's so much there for them to do, so it's about how we communicate this exciting message to them to get them into the industry when we're having to focus on homegrown talent. Second part was sustainability. My conclusion is that in the next 5 years, I really do not think that Brexit will have an impact in terms of the way we go about sustainability. Now, by that, I mean the fact that we as developers and contractors are constantly having to go that little step further to be ahead of standards. So on the one hand, you've got the technical arguments, which are the fact that most European directives are already enshrined in UK law. You have things like environmental impact assessments, which we developers, you know, often moan about the cost and the time, and they can be a pain, but then you think, well, that's become so enshrined in the way we do things. No one's come up with a better way of doing them. They actually provide a really good way to mitigate environmental impact that I just cannot see us going backwards. And in fact, I think the UK led quite a lot in the instigation of those. So the technical arguments for me do not point to our dumbing down of sustainability. But the key overriding factor for me, the slightly softer one, it's a bit wishy-washy, but I think it is the fact that I think nowadays sustainability is in everything we do. We just know it's the right thing to do. My company, a lot of your companies will have corporate social agendas, sustainability agendas, as a way of being measured. It's not just about, you know, your net profit. It's very much about everything else that you're doing as part of your projects. So I'm not trying to sound naive, but I just think it's just the way we do things now. And just to end, every time I interview a graduate or they come and work for us, and I ask them, have you got any questions for me? I tell you what, there's one overriding thing that they're interested in. It's not about my developer margin or, you know, how many units can I squeeze into a box. No, it really is sustainability. There's such a passion in terms of when we're designing a scheme, you know, how we're going to make it healthy living for the people who work there. How do we improve the environmental efficiency of a building? How people interact. Honestly, I'm not trying to sound naive again. It's just a passion which, regardless of what's happening with Brexit or directives, that's really what's motivating people to get into the industry. Any company or institution that feels they can pull back from that, I'm afraid is probably going to end up losing talent from a generation which, as I say, has got its mind on a much more sustainable agenda. So that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So that started off a bit negative and became very positive.
Yeah.
I'm just interested in the transition there. You know, we had this Brexity vote thing, and it seems that most of the people who voted leave, one of the main motivators was that they were voting against further immigration. We have the city demanding immigration. We have the car industries demanding immigration. Both of them appear to have the ear of the government. There is going to have to become a cut-off point at we start saying, well, actually, we've got immigration in these sectors. We're not going to have immigration in these sectors. And maybe construction, could it be that construction's lobby is not consistent enough or coherent enough to make its case? Is that possible?
That's certainly something that's been talked about, that, you know, we don't act, because it's a much more fragmented market, so we don't act in such a united front as many other industries do, where you might have 3 or 4 big car automotive players, that perhaps we're not having a strong enough voice. Hopefully we have representatives here in the panel who can help us out. But you know, eventually in time, what's going to happen is that if we're not building enough houses, with or without immigration, I'm afraid, the pressure on providing houses for people is just going to carry on growing. So the government's going to be hearing this, and they will have to do something about it. They don't have the skills in the domestic market, in the domestic workforce. So I'm afraid, yes, I'll have to give in. So whether they hear the calls now or suffer the calls later, I think that's what's going to happen.
Can I ask how realistic is the skill stream coming through? I know a lot of builders, and one of them told me recently he'd tried to employ a quantity surveyor in the Midlands in his late 20s, and the man asked for an exorbitant wage, and when he wasn't offered the wage, he said, "Oh, don't worry, somebody's offering me twice as much." There's a level of desperation in some skill sets, just not enough people coming through, and they can demand their own wages.
It's a combination of, it's a very tight labour market, so that's definitely happening. A lot of contractors, you'll have read in the press, have suffered problems on sites over the last couple of years, so they're bringing in resource to try and fix them, which again puts even more pressure on the labour market. And when you're trying to fix a problem quickly, you're paid top whack. So, you know, the marginal employee at the moment does seem to have the upper hand. So at the moment, we're not solving that endemic problem. Yes, it's good to pay them a little bit more, but we do have to look more in the long term.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, you know, maybe perhaps automation can help us out a bit. We're now going to hear from Brian Berry, who's Chief Executive of the Federation of Master Builders. That might be one thing you'd consider. Please do come through. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Just in case you're not so familiar, the Federation of Master Builders is a trade body for SME builders, and with over 8,000 across the United Kingdom, we're the largest trade body in the construction sector. And as part of that, we've got a proud record of training apprentices, but about 2/3 of all construction apprentices are trained by the SME sector. Now, in terms of the EU referendum, it may not come as a surprise that the majority of my members are probably in favour of Brexit. There was a perception of people undercutting their work, too much red tape, regulation. This were the arguments coming back. But as an organisation, the F&B took a neutral stance on the debate, and we continue to do that. But of course, members are their concerns have to be reflected in what we're talking about today. So in terms of the immediate impact, I mean, we heard an awful lot during the referendum debate about actually the negative consequences of the UK pulling out. The reality is that for my members, in terms of their workloads, they have continued. It has been business as usual. And workloads from our State of Trade surveys show that actually things are doing very well. There has been a dip in London, as you may expect, but overall, they've been doing very well. Now, there are some challenges, which obviously you would expect. And at the moment, there is a growing skills crisis in this country. We do a survey which shows that actually our Q4 for last year reported that 58% of our members are having problems finding bricklayers, 57% finding plasterers, and it continues right across. But although the skills crisis has developed, I would argue that Brexit wasn't the cause of that, because actually we've had a growing skills crisis from before the referendum. The problem is it's been a bit of a boom-bust. During the 1990s recession, about 500,000 people left the construction industry, and that was repeated again during the 2008-2009, when about 400,000 people left. So the problem for the industry is retaining talent, and this had nothing to do with the UK coming out of the EU. Now, we hear in terms of the dependence on EU labour, and it's true that about 7% of the construction labour overall comes from the EU, and that increases to about 40–50% higher in London. So in London in particular, there's a particular problem there about actually how are we going to address the skills crisis when we come out of the EU. So in terms of the opportunities, though, I think the key issue is actually to develop homegrown talent. For too long, apprenticeships have been undermined and sidelined. The emphasis has been very much about going to university, and only recently are we beginning to actually wake up to the fact that actually having a career using your hands is as good as going to university. And certainly most of my members have started off by learning a trade, and by developing that trade, set up their own business. They've been very entrepreneurial, and that type of entrepreneurship is what we need at the moment to actually make sure that Britain is able to compete in the global markets. The decision about the EU has been made, and it is, as Diane said earlier, a job of us getting on with it. And what we need to be doing now is developing quality apprenticeships, restoring the pride. We need to be encouraging young people to come into our industry. There's a job for the industry to actually raise its game, improve the image, and certainly within the FNB, one of my main challenges is to raise the status of the domestic builder. For too long, builders have been seen to be not professional. Well, we've upped the standards in terms of entry criteria coming into the FNB, but I want to actually push that ahead so that actually there becomes a professional domestic builder, that we do check all our, the quality of those builders coming into the industry, because at the moment anyone can be a builder. That's the problem. There is no registration, no licensing, no protection, and we need to address that if we're going to go forward. The Bonfield report, which came out recently, talks about standards in the energy efficiency sector, and I think we should be expanding that right across the entire building industry. So I think there are great opportunities going forward for the building industry, particularly in the domestic sector. Brexit has happened. We just need to get on with it. The government needs to provide certainty, get on with the business, and let the industry then respond to that. And let's raise our game by having an industry that we can all be proud of. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. You talked about red tape. You know, we have some Leave voters in the audience. One of the things behind Leave was red tape, EU red tape. Do you see any, I mean, firstly, can you describe whether you think yourself red tape rules is a problem? And if it is or isn't, whether or not it'll change on Brexit?
Well, builders do talk a lot about red tape, but actually in terms of building regulations, they are very useful actually for maintaining standards. There are probably more concerns about employment rights, and which affect all businesses, which are not particular to construction. I think it's some of those that the builders would like to see reformed. But in terms of standards, we've got to increase our standards. We actually need to make sure building regulations are fit for purpose, that we're building buildings that are sustainable, that have a long life, that we're actually increasing the standards in training. My members welcome that, because we need to make this an industry that we can be proud of and not actually allow everyone to come in and set up a business in the afternoon, go out with a van selling to the public. That's where the negative images come from. That's why consumer programs and magazines talk about cowboy builders.
Okay, so if the regulations, if the red tape over regulation isn't in those terms, where is it? Or is it a myth, or does it exist? If it is, where is it, and can we get rid of it?
Well, the red tape itself is more about when you take on staff, how do you get rid of staff, paternity rights, those things. If we're going to be competing...
And do you see those things changing on Brexit?
Do I see them changing? Well, I think we ought to be looking at them.
Easier to sack workers?
Britain has got to compete in the global market. We've got to make sure we're fit for purpose. And that's not about stripping it all away and making us the Hong Kong of Europe. But actually, we can be, if we can strip things away to make our businesses operate more quickly, more efficiently, then we can compete in the global market. And that's what we have to do. I think rather than all the doubts, we should be taking pride and saying, actually, this is an opportunity for us to say, yes, Britain, UK PLC can succeed.
Let me ask you a question, put you on the spot. Name 3 bits of red tape you want to see cut on Brexit.
Well, the red tape is not the primary function. The primary function of us is about increasing the standards of the domestic sector. It's not just about the red tape. It's actually raising the status of the building industry. And actually...
So more red tape?
Sorry?
More red tape? I'm just trying to find out, you know, because people like me in the media select phrases like red tape and we bandy them around, and it becomes a slogan, and then it kind of becomes real. What I'm trying to find out from you is it true that the accusation of red tape holding down the building industry, is that true, or is it a media myth?
Well, in terms of specific examples would be in terms of new building, the move towards zero carbon. That puts a lot of onus on small builders who don't have the resources to actually train up and put that into practice. They need longer time scales. So when we're introducing new legislation, it should be much more tailored to the needs of SMEs so that they can respond in a way that is appropriate. It suits larger companies, but smaller companies will take longer because there's a cost implication for them. The red tape debate really is taking a side route. I think actually there's an opportunity there for the building industry to do well in the new market, and it's going to happen.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, we're now going to hear from Don Foster, now in the Lords, formerly a government minister. He knows all about how slogans can develop and things can get spun and the effect they have directly on the political system. Don. And he's smiling, so I think he agrees.
Well, good morning. Politicians should always declare their interests before they say anything, so I have 3 to declare. 1, I'm a Liberal Democrat. 2, I voted for Remain and campaigned for it. And 3, very sadly, as the Buildings Regulations Minister, I fought to introduce zero carbon homes and failed. But let me talk about the construction industry and give you a list of 1 or 2 things you may suddenly remember. 1 million new homes by 2020. HS2. The schools expansion programme. The prison rebuilding programme. The Northern Powerhouse. Crossrail 2. Thames Tideway. Hinkley Point. Rail electrification. And of course all sorts of opportunities for export growth. Those are some of the many things that the construction industry in this country is expected to deliver. It is undoubtedly a strategic industry, but sadly, as I will refer to in a second, is not truly recognized by government as being one. To deliver all of those things I have given on the list, the construction industry in this country would have to expand by 35%. But if we have a hard Brexit, and as Oliver has pointed out, we will lose access to those 250,000 non-British EU workers, 9% of our workforce, who are already working here. We need to expand by 35%, and we are likely, if we have hard Brexit, to decline by 9%. The problems are already beginning to be seen. Here is a newspaper headline: flight of non-UK nationals puts Bristol housing plans at risk, as the Mayor of Bristol is competing against Hinkley Point to get people to come and build the houses he has pledged to build in Bristol. The industry itself is bigger than aerospace and vehicle manufacture combined. We hear a lot in politicians speak and in Parliament at the moment about vehicle manufacture, the automotive industries. We don't hear the same things about the very much bigger construction industry. It's worth remembering there were £73 billion worth of contracts in the construction industry last year, and in addition a further £8 billion of worldwide projects that were being delivered from UK-based companies. 2.9 million employees as well. And yet, as we've heard from others, a boom and bust approach to work streams leading to insecure, de-skilled workforce, the UK recruitment challenge, which Brian talks about, with low retention rates, and of course an aging workforce where the recruitment is lower than the number of people who are coming into the sector. And it's worth reminding ourselves too of a poor gender balance, with only 9% of the workforce are females. So what do we need following that Brexit decision from politicians? The first thing is that politicians have got to start listening to the construction industry in a way that to date they simply haven't been doing. We also need to make sure that government understands that we need, even if it's not in the long term, though I think it should be, at least in the medium term, we absolutely have got to be able to hold on to those non-British EU nationals. It is absolutely vital if we're going to have ability to deliver some of those projects. And for those who say, well, we can get people in anyway by other routes, I'm sure there are some of you here who are well aware of the complexities that apply to the Tier 2 visa system for non-EU workers coming into the country. They are not going to be a viable solution to the problem that will exist. But it's not only the free movement of labour, we also need to have the free movement of goods and services, which means mutual recognition of trade skills and professional qualifications, common standards, as Ant has talked about, for materials and products, a common legal system for contract procurement and dispute resolution, all underpin the value chain to enable us to get that £8 billion worth of work that we get in from exporting goods and services. And just remember that a third of all our materials in the construction industry come from the EU, and 90% of our timber does. It is vital we have that mutual recognition of standards and qualifications. And so it means that we've got to do a number of other things as well if we recognize some of the problems. The first one, and others have talked about it, I won't go into it in detail, is addressing the skills problem that we've got. It is vital that we acknowledge we have got to address as an industry, you have got to address and work with government to deal with this particular issue. Oliver was absolutely right to say, at last a start has been made to acknowledge the equivalence between vocational and academic qualifications with the T-grade announcement yesterday. I welcome that, although there's a lot more work to be done on it. But you know, as an industry, you have got to address it yourself. You currently have a problem, I recognise, CITB, there are some concerns about the work there, but you then got the coming problem of double funding because you'll be expected to contribute to CITB and many of you to the new apprenticeship levy. That's got real problems associated with it as well. And we've also got the difficulty that because so many of the projects that many of you engaged on last for only 2 years, and yet some apprenticeship schemes need 5 years, you're not willing to take them on because there isn't the continuity of work for them to become engaged in. But that is an issue. The Farmer report, I think, gives some very good advice as to work that needs to be done. And my final point is that we also need you to work with government to ensure that we can get some continuity in the workforce by having a proper, credible 20-year pipeline of spending and volumes and projects in housing and other infrastructure projects. It's worth reflecting that the National Infrastructure Commission, which was set up by Francis Maud to try and get to grips with the different workings of different government departments, does collate the work that is meant to be going on, and it plans it, but it doesn't have any form of real clout at the moment to plan it properly and to give it some real meat, because it's not an independent body, and I believe it should be. There are many other things I could say, but basically government needs to listen to the industry more than it does. It needs to protect the continuance of workers from the EU 27. We need that free movement of goods and services. We need to address the skills agenda, and we need a decent 20-year pipeline. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Don. I'm just going to take now a couple of questions from the audience. We're coming to the end of the session, unfortunately. We started a little late, but there's a direct challenge to you guys here. Thanks, Don. There's a direct challenge to you guys. This man, he's been a minister, he's been at the listening end. He says you guys aren't shouting loudly enough. You're not getting yourselves together. You're not getting your act together. Any thoughts on that? I've got microphones either side of the floor. Sir, are you scratching your armpit or are you volunteering to ask a question? There's a man here who might be doing one or the other. Just say your name, what you do, and very briefly make your point.
Hello, my name's Stephen G. I'm a surveyor by training, but I've been an employer for most of my working life. We've all talked about having a common voice and having more things, but already on this panel, if the FMB are trying to represent the industry, we've already just shown we're not really speaking with one voice. So does the FMB in particular recognise the skills shortage that exists, or is it just imagining that just because they're members who are one or two men businesses or whatever they might be, don't recognise that they're not willing to join a lobby of government to say that the industry will only succeed if we do have free movement beyond
I think he was clearly saying that there is a skill shortage. I'm not sure. Just spell out where you think the disjunct is, the malfunction between the different elements.
Well, I understand their issue that their members were not in favour of Remain, but they have to speak for the industry. I did think, it didn't come over to me, certainly, that the FMB would be part of a wider lobby group that said we need free movement of people beyond, to get those skills beyond the time we leave.
That's a fair point, I get you. Let me
I was speaking about actually the skills crisis started before the EU referendum. We lost 500,000 in the 1990s, 400,000 in 2007, 2008. So there has been a major problem. That skills crisis has been filled by EU migrants coming into the UK.
But the gentleman's, sorry to interrupt, the gentleman's point is that lots of your members voted to leave and implicitly want to cut off the skills
I don't know
they themselves depend on.
No, let's be clear about this. The FMB did not take a stance on it. It was anecdotal. I don't know how my members vote. I just pick up what they hear. I suspect a lot of them did vote to leave, but that's not for the FMB to comment on. But if they did vote to leave, they did so for their own reasons. In terms of the skills, what we ought to be doing, as I said, is actually developing apprenticeships in this country, because the value of them has decreased over the last 20 years. And that becomes more and more important now that actually there are concerns about where would the labour come from. We will need some free movement of people coming in with particular skills, because we can't train up our own people in this country to that level now. But we can't rely on that, because it's not going to happen. So that's why apprenticeships and developing homegrown talent is absolutely vital.
Okay, thank you. Any other points, questions? The lady here. Just say who you are, what you do in a brief point.
Maria Hanrahan, I'm a chartered surveyor and project manager. It's just a thought that's occurred to me as I've been listening to the speakers. I just thought if the construction industry stands to be a key beneficiary from increased immigration, perhaps the construction industry may be able to help the government find solutions to some of the issues that arise as a result of mass immigration. So that might be pressure on schools and local health facilities, overcrowding, pollution, so that we sort of widen the debate a little bit and address some of the practical issues around immigration.
What do you have in mind specifically?
I don't know, that's why I'm asking the question.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Yes, Diana.
Walking around here, you'll see lots of solutions. There are already materials that are being used in schools and hospitals. In hospitals, where they contain biocides, so they make the whole areas clean. In schools, they have noise reflective or retention, so all pupils can hear equally well. In homes, one particular house builder is making sure that the smallest room in the house, i.e. the child's bedroom, has a type of plasterboard that absorbs VOCs because of the link to asthma. So already products are beginning to be out there that actually massively improve the health outcome of us using and living in the built environment. The challenge is how we get those into every building and how we also get them into every retrofit. And I think that's a real challenge for this sector. We are inherently conservative, and we're inherently diverse in terms of everything from very small builders to large contractors. How do we make sure all of them have the knowledge and skills to start using those new products, and where does the risk lie? Because that's also the million-dollar question. So we've got lots of innovation on the shelf and round here. It's just how we get them every day into buildings.
Okay, thank you. I mean, you mentioned retrofit there. I did a story for the BBC last week, calculations from the Green Building Council that we need 25 million refits between now and 2050, 25 million, which equals 1.44 refits every minute, day and night, between now and 2050. Clearly a challenging target, if you think the word challenging is adequate for a scale of like that. Any thoughts on retrofit, Brexit, housing, carbon emissions, and all that combination?
Just on the retrofit.
Actually, it'd be really nice. I mean, thank you so much for volunteering. But it would just be nice to hear from one of the other guys, given there's only a few minutes left.
I mentioned at the end of my presentation, Roger, from a retrofit, I see that as being the most important issue to undertake. Yes, we've got some very high-performing new homes. We've got an awful lot of homes that do not perform, and they make up 27% of our emissions. We have to take this seriously. I've personally been involved in the Every Home Counts review that Pete Bonfield took forward. That is now gaining traction, and we need to surround and support that moving forward.
VAT, yes.
Thank you. Don, do you see that?
No, I was just going to say there is a big VAT issue here as well. If we could actually address the VAT issue to bring the price down of the materials for retrofit.
The EU has previously insisted that we should charge VAT on energy-saving materials. Presumably on leaving the EU, we can abolish that rule.
Yeah. I mean,
would you be in favour of that?
I mean, I'm not in favour of Brexit, but one of the benefits is we do have greater control of VAT once we've left. And that's one of the areas. I have a few others I'd put into the list, but that's one of the areas we could be addressing.
And would you, as a Lib Dem spokesman, be in favour of scrapping VAT on energy saving?
Well, I think since...
Is that a yes or a no?
The answer is yes, but the person in the department at the time I was the minister will know I was arguing for that at the time as well, so yes.
You were indeed. OK, look, time for just one more point, one more question. Gentleman at the front here. Please keep it short, because I'm on a strict timetable.
Yeah, I'd like to offer an observation that during the time we've been in the EU, this country has been a lot more open to companies from France and Germany, the likes of Bouygues, if you like, than vice versa. Is this, have our locals been outcompeted, or has the playing field not been as level as it supposedly was? And my question, could we have our national champions back?
OK, so we've been outcompeted in terms of winning jobs? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. Companies from the continent, if you like, have marched all over this country, but not vice versa.
OK, gentlemen saying that we've been outcompeted by continental firms since we've been in the EU in terms of construction. Can we get our own back? Any thoughts on that, Oliver?
Have we been outcompeted? I don't know if I agree, because if you look at the table...
Well, you're from a French firm. I think that's maybe the kind of point he's making, you know.
I'm going to justify my biased opinion on that. If you look at the top contractors, they're still very UK-based. Look, to some extent, I'm afraid, you know, real estate is a non-tradable asset, so people will naturally obviously concentrate, and there's plenty of business to be done here. Then you get to a scale where you have to expand and you go abroad. So that's one thing that we did around the world, and so Vancy and so Skanska, they've been able to come. But it hasn't been all bad, because they've brought not only capacity, but new ways of building. You know, we build the continental way here in the UK, so it's bringing, you know, different ways of doing things, which it's not about being outcompeted, it's just diversity, just in terms of you'd have diversity in any kind of market.
OK, thank you very much. So that's all for this session, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, clearly some very big challenges, but opportunities too. So let's thank our panel.